Good evening. I'd like to call the community of the whole for the Village of Cary for November 2nd, 2021 to order with roll call, please.
Dudek?
Here.
Weinhammer?
Here.
Valley?
Here.
McAlpine?
Here.
Walra?
Here.
Collier?
Here.
Thank you. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now move to the public comment. Anybody here would like to address the committee of the whole? We'll go ahead and close that at 6:52.
Room shrunk.
Thank you. Now to the first order of business is a discussion regarding police pension fund actuarial projection.
Each year, we have an independent actuarial valuation made of the village's police pension fund. The actuarial valuation is conducted by Foster & Foster, and tonight we have Heidi Andorfer here, who reviews and presents the calculation to the village board. Heidi?
Thank you very much, Mike. And thank you to the committee for having us here tonight to present the report. I understand that you each have a copy of the report in your packet, and I'm going to start you on page 5 of our report. So on page 5 of our reports, our bottom line on top, you can see that the numbers on the left-hand side are this year's numbers. The numbers in the right-hand column are last year's for comparison. As you can see, there was an increase year over year of about 2.6%. That was largely driven by, somewhat by methodology. So you do use a rather aggressive payroll growth assumption, which sort of indicates that every year
You said page 7 or page 5?
Page 5, sorry.
five?
Page 7 on our packet.
It's page 7 on our, okay.
Page 7 of the packet, page 5 of the Foster & Foster report, sorry about that. It says summary of report at the top.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So you can see that's about 2.6% increase. Some of that is driven by pure methodology. You do use a more aggressive payroll growth assumption than several other funds do. You are working to bring that down, and we're moving in the right direction with it. But it does indicate that every year you're more likely to see an increase than a decrease in your contribution. So we would expect that probably to continue until that assumption comes down a bit more. Then you also did have some assumption changes, specifically that payroll growth assumption that did contribute to some increase in that payment. And then there was some overall unfavorable experience in the fund. So we'll get into that in a few pages here, but I'm going to flip you now to page 7 of our report, page 9 of your packet. It says comparative summary of principal valuation results at the top. There are 3 columns here. The left-hand side will be based on the most current results, new assumptions. We do show a middle column so you can see what the numbers would have been had we not changed the assumption. And then again, right-hand side is going to be last year's results. The only assumption changes we made were to that payroll growth assumption. So they won't impact any of the liability calculations. It really only relates to how we amortize the unfunded accrued liability. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a page or two. So at the top, we have participant data. This is the data that we received to do the valuation. You can see that the population is somewhat stable year over year. You did decrease active head counts by 1, so normal costs will come down a little bit. That did help you out on the contribution a bit. You did have a retirement. That causes a loss to the fund. In any given year that a retirement occurs, it's generally a loss, and then you have gains between in the years that you don't have any retirements. If we look at the asset section, section B here, you can see we have an actual value and a market value. Actual value is a 5-year smoothing of your in your investment returns relative to the actual assumption. So anytime you beat the actual assumption, you have a gain. Anytime you don't meet the actual assumption, it's a loss. Your assumption right now is 7% in the valuation. So to the extent that you exceeded 7%, you have gains. That's what happened last year. And so if we look at the actual value of assets relative to the market value, you can see last year the relationship between actual value and market value, the actual value actually was higher than market value. That would imply you had outstanding losses at that point in time that were going to be rolled into your assets. That situation is reversed this year, and the relationship of the actual value actually lags market value at this point. It's about 90% of the market value. And that says that you have those gains outstanding that will be rolled into the valuation in future years and help out the contribution in those future years. I'm going to flip you now to page 8.
Heidi, does that have a, do you mind if we
interject ever so often?
Absolutely, I would love that.
Is that why the funded ratio rises between the 2 years for what you just explained there?
It's part of why it rises. There's multiple factors that influence that. Obviously, the investments in the fund are going to help out with that. We do smooth assets, so it's not going to rise as dramatically as it would if we reflected all of the market value of assets. You also do contribute pretty much the full contribution that we recommend, so generally that will show better funded status year over year in most situations. So the fact that the village is actually contributing the numbers that we're bringing to the table is helping as well.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, we turn to page 8 or page 10 of your packet and get into more of the liability calculations here. So near the bottom of that leftmost column is a number of about $27 million. This is representative of the liability that has been earned by the police officers in the fund today. So you could think of this as the accrued liability or what's already been earned, $27 million. That's what you're trying to fund towards. So in a perfect world, you're fully funded on that basis and you're just contributing new accruals to the fund on an annual basis. That's not the case for most funds in Illinois. It's not the case for your fund. So we do compare that to the actual value of assets to figure out how much is unfunded. So that's the number right below that, that $12 million number. So that's service that's been earned but not yet paid for. So that's part of the contribution calculation. It's effectively a mortgage on service that's been earned that you need to pay off in the future. You can see that you did have that improved funded status, so you're up to 55.4% year over year. And then the only other number I want to point out here is near the middle of that leftmost column, $525,900 is representative of the cost of your active police officers to earn 1 year of pension benefits. So that's part of the contribution as well. And we're going to flip to page 10 of our report, 12 of your packet. Section E at the top here lays out for you the contribution components and how we get to the actual expected contribution. In a perfect world, you would contribute just the normal cost, add to that the administrative expenses, so the cost to annually administer the fund, and then subtract from it the $226,540 for the police officer contributions that come out of their salary, the 9.91% of pay. That's what, if you were fully funded, that would be your annual contribution. However, as I mentioned, we do have that effective mortgage on that unfunded, and that's near the middle of the column there, that $848,742. So about 70% of the recommended contribution is just trying to catch up with those past service accruals that need to be paid off. That gives us an expected village contribution of $1,215,605. That did increase from last year. You can see had we not changed the payroll growth assumption, the number would have only been $1,198,378. But the effect of changing that payroll growth assumption, while in the short term has increases in contributions, it means that you won't see as steep of contributions now in the future. You've sort of lessened the slope of the increase in your contributions now. So that's a healthier place to be.
Heidi, from a payroll growth assumption, what do you think is the target? Are we going to see adjustments each year, do you anticipate, for the next few years?
So you're at 375 right now, which is higher than most funds are. I'd call it an outlier, probably barely. The majority of funds are at 3.5. That's still rather aggressive. To put it in perspective, if I look at your 5-year average of actual payroll growth, and payroll growth is trying to measure the department's payroll growth, your 5-year average has been 1.14%. Relative to the 3.75% assumption. Now, 1.14% would increase your contribution today quite significantly, so we don't expect to jump to something like that. And, we do understand this is a long-term assumption, so short-term inflation environment's obviously going to influence this. And so we don't directly tie it to that, but when we can bring it down, we do like that when it becomes affordable, because it does stabilize your future contributions and set you up for better success in the future. 10 years from now, your contribution isn't going to double if we've gotten that payroll growth assumption under control.
Thank you.
Sure. Section F on page 10 shows the past contributions relative to our expectations. So the village requirement was $1,069,489. The village actually contributed $1,067,057, so almost 100%, effectively 100%. So that's always good to see. One of the things I look at for the health of the fund is the village actually contributing the amounts that we're recommending? And so to the extent that you stay on this path and continue to do so, the fund will be successful as well. Okay, I'm going to flip you to page 12 of the report, 14 of your packet. So this is that amortization of that unfunded. So this is basically the mortgage payment that you need to make this year to pay down that unfunded. We do, this is a beginning of the year calculation, so it won't match what you saw in section E. We do apply interest there because we know these contributions happen later in the year, not on the valuation date. But if we look at this as of the valuation date, this $793,000 number in the very bottom right-hand side of the page is based on the 3.75% payroll growth assumption. To show you the power of that assumption, if we were to drop that payroll growth assumption down to 2%, which is closer to what your reality has been, that contribution would go up to $912,000, so almost $120,000 increase in your current payment. And so understanding that that's a hard assumption to change without sort of planning and budgeting. Yeah. We do have conversations each year with Mike to make sure that we understand directionally where we want to go, that we know what the village can afford. But ideally next year, we'd like to see that payroll growth come down another 25 basis points if it's affordable. Obviously, we'd never do that without consulting with you first, but something to keep on the radar. Okay. Turning to page 14 of our report, which is 16 of your packet, this shows you the reconciliation of the changes in the contribution from last year. So last year's contribution recommendation is item 1. This year's is item 3. And this shows you the components that really contributed to that increase. So the biggest one in here is that increase in amortization payment due to the payroll growth assumption. All else being equal, we expect the amortization payment to be, at this point, it was 4% higher than the prior year. We did drop that assumption down to 375 now, so this won't increase as quickly. But prior to that assumption change, every year I would be coming to you with a contribution about $31,000 higher. So that's going to come down now. A little. It's probably still going to be 27,000, something like that, higher, all else being equal. You did have some losses to the fund, as I mentioned, unfavorable experience, and I always hate to define it this way, but inactive mortality, you had no mortality experience in the fund. Anytime we have a retiree population and no deaths, you still are carrying liability for these folks, and our mortality tables would suggest that we expected more deaths than we saw. So in a fund of this size, that sort of, in some years you're going to have gains for that, some losses. It's not really going to be even because of the small nature of the fund. Somebody dies, it's a discrete value versus smoothed over many people. You did see the investment return though. So the actuarial value of assets, even on a smooth basis, returned 9.26%. That exceeded the 7% assumption. So we did see a $21,000 decrease in the contribution just for that. And then, of course, I did mention you saw your head counts decrease year over year. Now, I don't know what the expectation is of active police officer head counts. It could be an anomaly. We do valuation dates on snapshot dates. So whatever the population that existed on the valuation date was is who we valued. So to the extent that you do hire another officer next year to replace that officer that was down, you may see this reverse next year. Okay. I'm going to turn you to page 16 of the report, which is 18 of your packet. This is the contribution calculated at a 6.5% interest rate. This is what the Police Pension Board looks at when they look at this report. Just to let you know, you are using a 7% interest rate assumption, which we do have in the right-hand column there. Had we calculated your numbers at 6.5%, the contribution would have been about $173,000 higher at $1,388,408. Now, at this point in time, just to speak towards that assumption a little bit, the 7% is probably a bit aggressive based on how you're currently invested. That being said, we all know consolidation happened, and we know that a lot of the investment restrictions that existed on the funds prior to consolidation has been lifted. And so on a consolidated basis, we do expect these assets will have the ability to be invested more aggressively and likely support something closer to 7%. The police fund is a little bit behind the fire funds in terms of setting what that investment strategy is going to look like, but assuming it follows the fire funds, 7% is a very likely assumption, so you're probably already where you need to be there. Okay, if we turn to page 19, this is the assumption summary. And really what I want to focus on with respect to assumptions is because most of your assumptions are pretty good, but we did mention that payroll growth assumption. So near the bottom of this page, we have the funding policy amortization method and the payroll growth assumption. These two assumptions work in tandem. The funding policy amortization method is the way we're amortizing the unfunded accrued liability down and including it as part of your contribution. And then the payroll growth assumption dictates how quickly we're amortizing that. So the higher the payroll growth assumption, the lower your contribution is today, but then you see a very steep increase in that contribution over time. So where you can bring that assumption down, you really flatten that increase out. And that's what I was talking about with respect to bringing that assumption down. It's the only place payroll growth is used in that amortization calculation. And it does differ from salary increases. Salary increases are thought of on an individual basis for each person in the fund. The payroll growth is really trying to track how the total department payroll will change year over year, which obviously will take into account retirements being replaced by lower paid new hires and such. So it'll lag the salary increase assumption typically. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn you to page 30. On page 30, which is 32 of your packet, we have an age and service distribution of your active population. So you see age in 5-year increments along the left-hand side of the page, service across the top. Where I want you to focus on this page is really the bottom right-hand corner of this page. Anybody with more than 20 years of service over age 50, you could see that there's nobody in this category. That means as of the valuation date, nobody was eligible to retire. Generally, that tells me that your fund has a little bit more time for your money to work for you. We're not expecting any dramatic changes to your benefit payment stream in the future. Now, if I back that off 5 years and I look at anybody with more than 15 years of service, so over age 45, I add 5 people, which is about 21% of your population. That's lower than I see in most funds. So again, that's telling me your fund's in a little bit different situation and that you do have time for your money to work for you. You're not going to have a big influx of retirements that are going to influence the benefit payment stream in a significant way. Okay, on page 32, I just wanted to point out that we do have a 3-page summary of the plan provisions here. This doesn't replace Article 3, but it's a lot easier to reference if you ever have a question come to you about differences between Tier 1 and Tier 2 benefits and such. This would be a good place to start before trying to dig into Article 3. And then I'm going to flip you to page 35. I wasn't intending to get into GASB in great detail. I have a feeling you already see that through your audit review, but I did want to point out a couple of things here. When you are looking at our report, I walked you through the funding calculations. The accounting calculations are going to look a little bit different. First of all, there's no smoothing. Accountants don't like smoothing. So you're getting the market value of assets, which will introduce a lot of volatility to the numbers here year over year. Obviously, one of the things to point out here on page 35 or 37 of your packet, the funded status last year on a accounting basis was about 52%. It went all the way up to 62% this year. That's a 10% swing just because the market did so well. So obviously, that was great this year, but that situation's reversed in other years. So just keep in mind that that's one of the differences you're going to see here in accounting is when you look at these numbers, there's going to be a lot more volatility. But otherwise, all the assumptions that we use to calculate these numbers are similar. The other one I want to point out is the pension expense on this page. You can see, again, that's a very dramatic change. So when we calculate contributions, we are smoothing over a much longer period of time and spreading any gains and losses out over a lengthier amount of time. Accounting has us amortize these things very quickly. So the fact that we had such a large asset gain, that's getting amortized over 5 years. So that's why you see such a dramatic decrease in your expense, because in 5 years, you're recognizing all of those asset gains. So just to point out a couple of things, when you are looking at accounting, it will be quite different than what you're seeing in funding. So with that, does anybody have any questions about anything they're seeing in the report?
Are we currently keeping up with the current actives? So it seems like, and this is even my recollection from prior years, that we're really in a catch-up position.
Yeah.
So for the people that are currently active, are we funding, 100% for them and then whittling away at the historic deficits that we've had?
Yes, so that's the calculation on page 10 or page 12 of your packet. The normal cost is the annual accrual, which is part of our contribution recommendation. So that is, you're funding that, and then you're funding the cost to administer the fund each year. So that's part of the contribution calculation. And then on top of that, there's an amortization payment on that past debt to pay down. So every year, part of the contribution calculation is just to keep up with the current accruals that the actives are occurring.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you very
I don't know how
much.
you keep it all straight.
I apprate your time tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I was just going to say, you're pulling these, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
No, you do a great job.
Thank you for helping us out, Heidi.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Michael, you're up. Let's talk about our tax levy.
It's all about money today.
Annually, we go through this exercise.
Yep.
Village of Cary is a non-home rule community. We're subject to tax caps. So our levy each year can only go up by the lesser of 5% for the annual CPI, which this year was 1.4%. Each and every year, we have 4 choices that we can make. We can have absolutely no increase in the tax levy. We can accept the new growth, which again, I'll remind everybody sitting up there, the new growth adds no additional tax burden to our current residents or commercial taxpayers in the community. None. That new growth or the increase attributed to the new growth is being paid by the new property owners who are coming on to the village's tax rolls, who are paying their fair share, just like every other person in the community is, based on our tax levy in the past. Just as a reminder, in recent years, and I know the board's sensitivity to having that tax levy increased, the increases that we have seen in the tax levy have all been attributed to new growth, and we have not increased the tax levy based on the increase in CPI, at least as long as I have been here in front of you.
Michael, can I ask a quick question? So is it because we can't capture new growth based upon us not being home ruled? Can home ruled communities just automatically collect new growth without having to vote on it?
Well, probably the biggest difference, if we were a home rule community, we could pretty much levy what we chose to and would not be subject to having to go out to referendum to have that approved. Just by our home rule powers, we would be able to do that. Because we are non-home rule, we're subject to the tax caps, which places these various restrictions on us. So what I'm highlighting in my memo is we have the option to accept the new growth. If we chose to, we could accept the consumer price increase growth, which in this case, that's $35,000. The new growth amount that I'm asking you to accept is $16,000. If we accepted the consumer price index and added $35,000 to our levy, I have calculated that to mean it would cost the owner of a $300,000 home in our community $4. And in all honesty, I'm probably being conservative stating it at $4. I doubt it would hit that simply because the overall valuation of the community will go up. So, but $4 is a fair amount. Or we could accept consumer price index and the new growth, which would increase our levy by $51,748. Again, the new growth adds nothing to a current resident's tax bill, nothing.
Can I ask a question about that? I
Sure.
thought in years past, we discussed like if they put an addition on their home or something of that nature, that it wouldn't, that would be some impact.
Trustee Cavelli, yes, but that is only because they have increased the valuation of their property.
Sure.
That is the only reason. If their home stayed the same or where there are no changes, there would be no impact on their tax bill.
Sure. So any
And it-
improvements that they made that would increase. it,
Exactly.
right?
And from us, or from myself going through, based on the numbers I received from the county, I couldn't identify those individual homes to tell you who might see an increase when I'm telling them there won't be any increase.
Okay.
Okay?
Right. So anyone that pulled a permit and did work is potentially
Above a certain value.
correct. Well, I mean, exactly, if they did their basement, did some addition, did whatever they did.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, in the past, what I've said is, we have accepted the new growth. That's the decision that we're making tonight. And the reason we're doing this is, we are required under truth and taxation to come up with an estimated levy. We have the ability to change that estimated levy up until the time we actually approve it. But for purposes of meeting the requirements, we're coming up with an estimated levy, and that's what we're talking about tonight.
Can I ask another question? So if any of these dollar amounts, other than obviously zero, are approved, does that money then go into the general fund?
Yes.
Okay, because the reason why I'm asking is because it seems like this discussion always follows the police pension
Well-
discussion. But it goes in the general fund that'll fund other things besides the police pension, is that correct?
Let me explain that a little bit.
Okay,
The actual levy here of the village has really not changed that much, at least in the time I've been here. It's 2.5 million. Each and every year, though, when the police pension actuarial requirement goes up, what I end up doing is raising that amount to reflect it on the levy and lower the general fund's number so that I keep the levy pretty much the same overall. The overall levy does go up. All of the money is coming to the village of Cary. We just try as much as possible to absorb whatever that police pension valuation is within that total amount.
because there's other pensions within the
Yes.
village. and-
Yes,
Okay.
there are. And those are covered in here as well. You'll see in the breakdown
Okay.
that's in this section.
I know, just something I've observed, and it's not just this village with the police pensions, that this tax levy gets discussed, so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that correctly.
Yes, you are understanding that
Thank
correctly.
you.
To give you some idea too, just so I could tell you, the rest of the municipal employees their pension is through IMRF. That contribution rate for the village of Cary dropped considerably this year because IMRF and the municipal pension fund gained $10 billion in 1 year. And that probably equates to, for the village of Cary, I'd say probably close to 75,000. That our contribution to the IMRF pension actually dropped. We don't evaluate that separately. Within our budget, we just base the numbers you see on the budget based on our actual rate. So whatever that rate comes in, that's what we budget for, that's what you see. We don't have this big discussion that we have related to what Heidi presents. One is enough, right, Heidi? Yes. So really, it all comes back to the village board. Whatever it is you're comfortable with. Again, I would just say, I know that day is coming. I may not be here, but that day will come when all of these rabbits we've been pulling out of the hat to get us to where we are today, that some of those funding sources are going to dry up. And there will be bills that we will need to pay, And I just want the village board to remember that we have to continue to think about those things because that day will come, and I just don't want you to say, I never told you.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'd be remiss without adding that, and we've seen it through the budget process of, every year we show the big three, and one is included is the property taxes, and that has stayed level. Property taxes, as Director Ducharme has said, we've been right around $2.5 million here for quite some time. But with that, we see increases in the police pension fund. We have contractual arrangements with our employees. Health insurance, continues to go up. I don't see any of those things going in the opposite direction. And so that's why, we bring this to you here to have the discussion. I'll add that our property tax rate is one of the lowest in McHenry County. The board should be proud of that.
Yes.
And then the one final thing is, from a property bill standpoint, I don't think that a lot of residents understand how their property bill is broke up and where they're making payments. It is a deal, and I might be biased, it is a deal of what you pay to the village of Cary. It's less than 5%. And you think about the police protection you get, the plowing of the streets, those are more general fund. There's obviously other funds that we have that pay for water and sewer, but I think that that's a pretty good arrangement that we have for our residents.
All of our residents always see the village of Cary's presence within the community, and they feel the impact of that. That is not necessarily true related to some of the other taxing bodies. They're all needed. It's just sometimes when you look at the increases that are coming through there, I don't think sometimes all the other taxing bodies take the same stance that the village board has here in terms of trying to control that.
I only have two comments. The first one, Michael, is I had to wait 4 years for that speech, and I used to enjoy it. I enjoy it just as much now. The second one is I'd be remiss if I won't be consistent with the way I was for 10 years. The village's budget needs every penny it can get. It is not popular to talk about tax increases, but when you really think about the dollars, you can broadly say someone voted for a tax increase. That's not popular. Break it down to dollars and cents, and it's less than the cost of going to McDonald's, to your point. So in my opinion, as I've always been in the past, I would say we pick up the new growth and we pick up the CPI, and we budget to make Cary the best place it could be. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'd like to piggyback on that exact same thought, Rick, and say that if you're taking the consumer price index piece into account and having not taken that through the 6-year history I see here, then you could easily make the argument that we have been taking in less each year. So
Yes.
you could easily make that argument that the value of what we're taking in is worth less every single year. So I like the financial position that the village is in. The police pension presentation we just had, notwithstanding, we're doing a good job. We're being sound fiduciary. And I believe that it's time for us to take the CPI and the new growth and ensure that we're still in a strong, viable financial position in the future.
Any other comments?
I'm in favor of taking both also. I think we're putting ourselves way behind the 8 ball if we don't do this. And like you said, we've been 6 years sitting here of only taking new growth, and sometimes not all the new growth. And
Well, it's been longer than 6 years that we haven't taken new growth.
That's how long has it been since the CPI, Mike? How long
Well,
have you been here?
Guy, since the time I've been here, so let's say 2014, we haven't taken CPI.
And with new growth.
You have been
CPI,
consistent, and
Right.
under the new growth scenario, please, I would stand up here and tell you each and every year, take the new growth, if nothing else. And the reason I say that is, you may look at it as it's $16,000, but it's not just $16,000. It's $16,000 that's added to the base of our levy, and you're going to see $16,000 additional dollars each year going forward until you decide that you're going to reduce that levy. The other thing I would tell you, 70% of the expenses that you see in that general fund budget are related to salaries. If you look at just what the average price increase each year or the increase that we give the employees, whether it's labor contracts or non-union commitments, it is always above, always. And it's a significant number. So we're always, each and every year, unless we see new revenue growth through some other revenue source, it's just we're losing money. And we just keep cutting things or reducing things in the budget to make those numbers work so that we can bring you a balanced budget each and every year.
Right, I just feel it's better to take the CPI at this, but we've talked about other revenue streams of village stickers on cars and pricing. I think it's much easier to absorb $4 to an $8 increase on your property tax than telling somebody they're buying a vehicle sticker again at this point. So I am definitely in favor of both this time.
Well, go ahead.
Okay, so Michael, I know I've asked you this question year after year, I feel. And the reason I'm asking is because the last time I was up for reelection, I felt that, and I feel that I do get along with everybody here on the board, but I do feel that, I was pushed into saying, hey, Jen wanted to go ahead and increase taxes with new growth. My understanding is that, again, I'll ask you again, you'll probably tell me the same thing, with new growth, that is not an increase in tax. That is just capturing the growth that we could have already had, correct? From like new businesses, or as Trustee Cavelli was saying, with new additions on buildings, correct? Or homes.
Let me try and give you a better example, okay?
I completely understand. I'm just saying this because, you know what, I agree with it, but people's perceptions on what's happening up here can be very different. So if we can just put this to rest and you can say,
Okay.
yes, just tell me, yes, it's a tax increase, or no, it's not a tax increase. We are just going ahead and collecting what we're due with new growth, meaning like new homes that have come in to carry,
New
things like that.
homes, new construction, new commercial construction. When I talk about new growth that I'm talking about is new properties that's coming onto that tax roll, and those people who are being added to the tax roll are paying the taxes associated with that. No one else in the community other than the person who built that addition or put that in-ground swimming pool in their backyard between last year and this year.
So what you are saying is this is not
It
us
is
voting
not
on an
impact-
increase of taxes.
It is not an
We're
increase
saying
in
that.
taxes exactly to those taxes. In a different way, if I could explain it.
I understand, I'm just saying to everybody here on the board, I want to make sure we're all on the same page here.
But I just want to
Thank you.
clarify, though, on page 52, we've the levy amount. So
The levy amount is going up,
Increase.
yes.
but it
and-
is not impacting the current.
Correct. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So,
One other thing, if I could just say. If you looked at the Village of Cary today, and next year, we built a whole nother Village of Cary and added it to the tax rolls within the course of 1 year. What I'd be standing in front of you is saying is, now that I've added double the amount of homes in the community, is it still acceptable to only have a tax levy of $2.5 million? And hopefully you'd look at me and say, are you nuts? How do we support that other half of the village we just added? The problem is with the numbers we talk about, it is so minuscule in terms of what that actual total is, yet it is important to the Village of Cary, especially because you're non-home rule.
Does that clarify your question?
It does, I hope everybody here is on the same page. I'm in favor of the new growth, but not in favor of the consumer price index.
I would say that I've always been in favor of new growth because there's no reason to build it if you're not going to collect the tax revenue that comes from it. We've always kind of sat on the back end with the consumer price index and not really done anything with it. I think the biggest challenge that we have is that the average consumer views their tax bill as the Village of Cary is getting everything. It's an educational component. It's a big hurdle.
It is an educational component.
Yes.
But that does not mean it is accurate, because if I stood up here and I showed you a chart of how the other taxing bodies, how their numbers went up and how much it impacted the tax bill, I think people would be surprised.
I agree with you 100%. I understand completely how it breaks down, what we're getting roughly 5% compared to the library district and the park district and everything like that. I'm still saying that the biggest challenge we have as a village board is an educational component to our residents.
I would never pick on the fire department or the fire district, but the point I'd make is, unless your home burned down, or unless you needed to call that ambulance,
Right.
odds are you paid a higher portion to that fire district than you paid to the village, who is out there picking up your branches,
Yep.
who is plowing your streets, who is watching the chief's police cars drive by at least probably once a day around their home. And to me, that's a whole lot more value than some of the other ones that are out there, yet no one seems to complain when those levies go up, because they just think it's the Village of Cary.
Right. Well, I just think with all of that in mind and where we're at, and, you know, the cost of us doing business is going to continue to go up. You know, again, it's always interesting, as Trustee Cavelli said, to have this discussion right after the pension. You're like, yikes, you know, I mean, we're all like, we know that that puts us in a very cash-strapped situation. But I think when you broke it down and said that, you know, if we were going to take the consumer price index, you're really talking about a $4 increase per household on a $300,000 home, roughly. I would absolutely be in agreement with taking both of them then.
Anybody else have any other comments? Everybody's kind of given their piece. I'll just throw in a couple things. Trustee Collier kind of nailed what I was going to
I
talk
didn't hear anything
about.
from Trustee Cavelli.
She talked.
Did she comment?
Trustee Cavelli, did you have any comments before I make a statement?
Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to, Dale kind of, Trustee Collier kind of hit the nail on the head, what I really wanted to get you guys to focus on a little bit more. We just had our annual budget review. We talked about the rising costs of everything. We did a community survey. The number one thing our residents want are good streets. We have, what, $27 million, Eric, of unfunded road projects that at some point have to be addressed. Close to, about?
It's substantial.
Director Morimoto, yeah. So when you're looking at these small incremental gains to our tax levy, it is really minuscule. We overwhelmingly said we don't want to do vehicle stickers. Vehicle stickers are very unpopular, but they generate a lot of money. So we could say, all right, if we're not going to have increase our levy by the $4 a year, we could invoke a municipal vehicle sticker tax at
It's going to be 50 or
$20, $25 a car. The average person has
30,
three
35,
cars.
yeah.
So already you're behind the eight ball. And we have to remember, and I've always said this number compounds every single year. And we need to be aware of this. We have, you know, I had this conversation with a couple of people about our new building. People are saying, well, you're not going to raise taxes. And I said, no, we're not raising taxes to build a new building. That's a separate bucket of money. That we have got that paid for. You are set as a resident in a business. We have paid for that. We have made the arrangements for this. It has absolutely nothing to do with our general fund. So the monies that coming in here are there. So we have to be accountable to future boards as they were to us to say, look, we need a few more dollars here. And every chance you get to capture a few more dollars, which unfortunately that's all it is. When I just had a group of Boy Scouts here, what day was it? Last week.
Thursday.
Bombarded by questions by all the parents. And we're talking about the taxes, and I just said, how much do you think that we could, if we were going to raise our taxes a year, do you have any idea how much it would be? And they're all like starry eyes, and I told them what it would be, and they're like, that's it? I go, yeah, that's it. That's all, by state statute says, that's all we could take. So people, when you're talking about the big picture, and then you got to take a step back and explain, again, what Trustee McAlpine was saying, it's educational. You take a step back at all of our different funds. You know, the
I'm going to say for the sake of an argument, 7,000 residences now that we have, several hundred businesses paying into this, and we get $2.5 million. Think about that. For 24/7 security, your streets are being paved, they're being maintained, your sidewalks, everything that this board wants to provide to our community is paid for out of our general fund. And our general fund is comprised of many different revenue sources, but only 2.5 is of taxes. So when you sit down and have a heart-to-heart discussion with the average taxpayer that thinks that we're responsible for the school district, the park district, the fire protection district, and all these, that when you explain to them, like, no, like I've had these people come into my office and I'll have somebody from finance bring me their tax record. I'll show, I circle the bottom two things on the tax bill and said, this is what we're going to talk about. Like, no, this whole tax bill. I go, no, I have no control over that. So it's an educational thing. And we have to start looking towards the future. And I think that it's time that we make these difficult decisions. It's not like we're doubling our taxes. Even if it said, I mean, I think, I don't know, I get really kind of compassionate about this because I know we have a lot ahead of us and we have to pay for a lot of things. And, you know, the escalation of labor, the escalation of cost of goods. I mean, look at what's going on with our economy. We've got to make sure that we can sustain ourselves as a municipality. So on that note, I think I have a majority of the board that is going to move forward with consumer price and the new growth from what I could tell right now.
So for purposes of bringing the tax levy to you, when that meeting occurs, I will take the existing levy that came off McHenry County's reports and increase it by the amount that I am showing you there for new growth and CPI. And that's what you'll be voting on. What is that, Jake, December, what is it?
That's what I was just pulling up here, Mike, because it won't be our November meeting. It will be December 7th.
December 7th.
Yep.
So that's the date when it'll be coming back in front of you and you'll be making the final decision of what the tax levy is that gets approved.
Mark, one more thing. I think it's important to note that even though this would be an increase, most of this is going towards stuff that is out of the village's control, these increases, and that they've done a great job cutting budgets for what we can.
Good point.
So it's another.
So those of you that have got some concerns, you want to talk about it, happy to
Please.
sit down and talk about it at any time.
Please, if there are residents out there who have no idea what it is that I'm talking about, I'd be more than happy to answer a phone call or answer an email or whatever.
Well, like one of the things too that I've noticed, and I've talked to several of the people, I know several of the people on boards that are other taxing districts, and they raise their taxes every single year, and not one person shows up at their meeting to discuss it. And where, as my mom or my dad used to say, where does it all go, Blanche? You know, but where is all this money going? So I think it's important that we take some time and educate our constituents as to why we do what we do, how we get where we are, and the limited resources as a non-home rule community we have to make things right.
Michael, I have a question for you. So if we just did, if you just did the consumer price increase, 1.4, how does that, because I think one of the things, Mayor, that I'm thinking about as all this conversation was going on is our tax bill just came out a little while ago, and my recollection is the increase we saw in the tax bill was 3.67%. So, you know, to your point, the average homeowner looks at their tax bill and says it went up and points the finger here. And a lot of the stuff that's on that tax bill has nothing to do with the whole presentation you just gave.
Nothing. And I'll be the first to tell you, and please, I understand why they do it. School districts, which are the largest part of someone's property tax bill, one of their only revenue sources, other than state funding, comes from property taxes. And because they want to take advantage of whatever available amount there is, they're always going to levy right up to that highest amount that they're able to make sure that they pick up every penny. If I was with the school district, I understand why they do it. I would probably be doing the same thing, but we are not. We're subject to tax caps. They're subject to tax caps, but they're trying to pick up every dollar they can.
No, as we talk about this, I don't want to seem like we're beating up on the school districts.
we're not.
I'm not. I'm just saying that, when you compare yourselves to the other taxing districts and what people are talking about in the community, it's just important to note that, we need to work together on these things and educate people what our responsibilities are.
In that dollar bill that's in your
Yeah,
packet,
that's great.
that's
Yeah.
the perfect example. That shows you exactly, we can't get any smaller slice than that. We can't. Our tax rate, if you looked at it over the last, God knows how many years, we consistently try on bringing that tax rate down year after year. And that's because we stick to as low of increase as we can, and we hope that the overall assessed valuation within the community continues to grow. And as long as that happens, that tax rate will come down. Thank you again.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate everybody's input. Moving along, we have a discussion regarding the Main Street and Downtown Capital Improvement Grant application and Al Fresco Alley on Spring Street. Eric.
Thank you, Mayor. I won the short straw to be the first presenter after talking about pensions. So,
Yeah, but we're talking about grant money. That's a whole different bucket of money.
exactly. Luckily, I'm going to be speaking
It's money
mostly
we're
about
getting.
leveraging outside funding. So thank you. We're going to be looking for your feedback on a potential grant application and your feedback on the scope of that application with regards to a new program from the state of Illinois. It is the Rebuild Downtowns and Main Streets Capital Grant Program, which is funded dually from state and federal sources, from both the American Rescue Plan Act and the Rebuild Capital Plan. So what this program does is it qualifies eligible projects to improve areas in downtowns, as the name indicates. And it is very specific to certain types of work, of which many of the projects we've been discussing in our capital improvement program would qualify for. One of the other qualifications and aspects of the program that help score it higher and increase your chances of securing that grant are projects that, in the state's words, have a strong connection with efforts to promote recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. And part of that are projects that demonstrate likelihoods of attracting future private investments, projects that have extensive community support, and projects that are part of regional or local plans. So on the slide before you is just an excerpt of the cover of our recently adopted Downtown Cary Strategic Plan. And then I highlight in there goal number 2, strategy 2, and action 1. I actually do highlight 2 very specific projects in our downtown. They call it out as a Train Depot Plaza and the Spring Street Plaza. So in our downtown right now, we have more or less 2 corridors of our historic downtown. We have the east-west segment of West Main Street between High Road and Jandis Road. And then on the north-south axis, you have Spring Street and what I'll be referring to from this point forward as the Depot Plaza, which is the site of the former Cary Metro Depot that is hopefully soon to be demolished in the near future as part of our current fiscal year budgets. So in previous CIP discussions, we had proposed and programmed and the intent to utilize the Rebuild Illinois Bond Grant money that all municipalities received a share of. And with our share, one of the eligible projects we were going to use was to reconstruct West Main Street, which also included streetscape aspects and improvements from High Road to Spring Street. So that's that area highlighted in red. What we're proposing is the other segment of the downtown that we've been working towards improving in our CIP in that north-south axis of Spring Street and the Depot Plaza. So this is turning around, looking southward over the downtown from our CIP and our 3D renderings. The board has seen through our past presentations our proposed Depot Plaza, which includes redoing the surfacing for a civic gathering space with sidewalks, artificial turf, a shade structure, bike racks, a outdoor fireplace, and some other streetscape elements. So that would be one component of the proposed grant application that we'd recommend that we feel would definitely meet a lot of the criteria and the aspects that will score well in this program. To further boost that scoring, we're also recommending extending that scope further southward into Spring Street and what through the pandemic has been kind of billed by the village as Alfresco Alley on Spring Street. So that's our segment of Spring Street, the north half of that block that we've been closing for the warm weather months for outdoor dining and a gathering space in our downtown. So what we suggest in that area, it was just recently resurfaced, but it does include a lot of other elements that would be eligible in this grant, which includes a lot of hard streetscape elements and improvements, such as new sidewalks, new planters and landscaping. We're suggesting, you can see in that image, there's an existing planter on the east side of the street, which is on the left side of this picture. We did recommend one option is mirroring that, so you can frame that entryway into that area with landscaping and signage. And two other decorative yet functional elements that we could consider, inspired by the suggestion from one of our trustees, was looking at the Umbrella Sky project, which was started out in Portugal, I believe, and extended into towns like Wausau, Wisconsin, and in Spain, where they utilize a canopy over the public spaces to give a nice visual interest and a burst of color, but also provide some much needed shade, depending on if you're going to program that area for use. So what we're suggesting as an option is a permanent shade sail over that block of Spring Street to, again, give that same visual punch to the festive atmosphere we have there and also provide some shade. In addition, there's other elements like the landscaping I mentioned and other maybe some more functional aspects like a decorative swing gate, which instead of dragging barricades and planters into the road to close it seasonally, we could more quickly and maybe more attractively close off the road with a decorative gate. This is in this case inspired by one I'd seen in my travels out in Colorado. And that's just a view of the same gate in the closed position. So as I mentioned, there's various aspects that could be also added into the grant as well. But what it would amount to essentially kind of dressing up and enhancing even further what we've already started out on Alfresco Alley. So part of this discussion was to ensure and get consensus on the scope of the grant application and also make sure and get the feedback from the committee on what your desires are for Alfresco Alley moving forward. Even if we take the grant out of the equation, we do want to make sure we're able to prepare for next season as well. Back to the dollars and cents. So with the proposed grant, it's the segment, again, highlighted in blue. So the three elements of that project are numbers 3, 4, and 5, the intersection of West Main and Spring, the Depot Plaza, and Alfresco Alley. That could amount to a project of approximately $1 to $1.5 million. And with this grant program for local municipalities, there is not a local match. However, they do prioritize and give you more points in your application if you do have a local match. So kind of balancing the need to keep our application competitive, but also leverage as much outside money as possible, and hence reduce our local share as much as possible. We're suggesting initially a 30% local share, which brings the local share to between about $300 to about $450,000 in that range. This would be subject to final engineering and more detailed cost estimates. And with that, I would entertain any questions and comments on the proposed scope and look to see if the committee would like us to move forward with the application for the grant, which would include a resolution of support at the next meeting and some continued work on our end, which includes a survey that Director Simmons had issued for local businesses to help our application document the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which again further enhances our scoring for the project. And we'll detail out the final scope and then bring that forward for one more look at a future meeting before the application deadline, which is in early January.
Thoughts, comments,
Question.
question?
Local share amount, match or proposed local share? Is some of that come from the donation received or no?
No.
Okay.
Those were earmarked for those other
Those are
projects.
projects already.
Yes, on the plaza.
I think it looks great, Eric.
Yeah.
The only thing I would, I was talking with trustee Cavelli about it a little bit earlier, is some sort of, like buy a brick program or something like that that we can incorporate. I think it would be cool for people in town to buy a brick, even if it's just a sidewalk, across Main Street, East Main Street, or West Main, I'm sorry, that might have their name. I think might be something that could catch on a little bit.
Not like that. We can incorporate and look into that.
Yeah, she had a great idea about it, so I want to give her credit.
I have a question about what are those, the sales? How are those, do those hold up in the winter months and storms, stuff like that?
We'll do a little bit more research, but obviously the intent would be they would be something that could be removed and reinstalled.
Okay.
But they're commercially available products. They're common in a lot of park settings. I think this particular configuration is not unheard of, obviously. Like the example out in Madrid, Spain, is pretty much exactly this concept. So they are designed to handle that continuous use. But yeah, given the way we're setting up and recommending it here, I would probably look at maybe taking them down in the winter if that would extend the life of those materials.
Sure. I like the swing gates. I think that's very practical, smart. That's a great idea.
Much better than dragging barricades.
Yes, I agree.
It looks a lot nicer.
Yeah, it does.
Well, it looks like it's intentional,
Yeah.
right?
Any other comments?
I think it's phenomenal. You do a great job with writing grants, and you're very successful in it. We're very fortunate that we've been very successful in that, and knowing what the hot buttons are to get the grant to go through, your expertise, I rely on that expertise for that. So I think that this would be a great amenity to bring to our community.
I love it. I do have a couple questions. So one of the things I really like when we get a village packet and we vote on something is it says, is this within budget? Yes or no? So is this something that's within our budget to go ahead and do?
Go ahead.
I will say obviously in our proposed budget, we are allocating money for the Depot Plaza, which was actually in our CAP in our budget. So obviously without this grant, that's still a project that is being proposed to move forward. But obviously at 100% of the cost by the village. So what you see here is if we're able to be successful in this grant, is this local share will actually be about equal and actually a little less than what we would pay for the Depot Plaza by itself.
Okay, that's
So
amazing.
it's, again, leveraging a grant to get a lot of nice to haves in addition to the need to have that we're already committed to moving forward on.
Great to hear. Thank you.
Excellent work.
I agree, as usual, Eric, great. Continue to make us better than we are.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric.
So assuming everybody still wants Al Fresco Alley. We forgot to mention that. Okay, next. Discussion regarding McHenry County zoning petition by Mixed Media for an electronic billboard adjacent to Westbury Drive. Brian, Director Simmons.
Thank you, Mayor. The item before you this evening is just for discussion purposes. Wanted to make the board aware of the zoning notice that we received from McHenry County for a case that they're reviewing. There's a proposed electronic billboard sign that is proposed to go at the corner of Westbury Drive and Northwest Highway, just west of the Dunkin' Donuts, which is in the Village of Cary. For reference, the western edge of that street is actually the edge of the Village of Cary. So the sign will be located within unincorporated McHenry County. It's not a petition that will be reviewed before the village board here, but that sign will be located only 10 feet from the Village of Cary's boundaries. So for reference on the slide, there's two images of billboards that Mixed Media has installed already within McHenry County. This is obtained off their website. There's one located just north of Main Street and Algonquin Road by the Western Bypass. And the second one that they've also installed is out by Illinois Route 176 and Route 47 on the far east side of Village of Lakewood and Crystal Lake. As proposed, they're seeking approval of a conditional use to install. The billboard sign would be roughly 35 feet in height. If reference, the image in the lower left-hand portion of the slide is put together to kind of represent how that height would compare to the existing Dunkin' Donuts. If you take into consideration the base grade for the sign and the base grade for the existing foundation for the Dunkin' Donuts facility, the height of that building is approximately 22 feet. The sign, as proposed, would still be another 5 feet higher than the peak of that roof to the parapet above the entranceway for the building. So that gives you some frame of reference as far as how the sign compares to other structures in the area. Also for consideration with the existing billboards that we have in the community, the existing billboard that's on the east end of town is driving to the Village of Cary along Lake Julian property. Is approximately 15 feet above the center line for the roadway on that location. So comparatively, that sign is 72 square feet in size, 12 or 6 feet by 12 feet in width. The proposed electronic signs proposed would be 11 feet tall for the actual sign face and 22 feet wide, or 242 square feet per sign face. So it'll be substantially larger than what some other structures that we do have in the community. So the purpose for the discussion this evening is just to get feedback from the board if this is a position that we're made aware of, that the county's going to be reviewing, if the board wants to direct staff to provide any response or information to the county for their consideration in the review of this position.
I just have a question. Do we have any say over what can or can't be advertised? I'm just thinking of the one on 31 that advertises dancers and things like that. Can we say that we don't want in our village that type of advertisement, or we have no say over that?
We have no control over what is put on a sign. From a legal standpoint, we can't regulate content of signs as far as what's displayed.
If this was within the Village of Cary, would it meet our UDO? Would it be something, the scope, the size, the way it's laid out? If it was within the village, would this be something that would fall within the UDO we developed?
Good question. The answer simple is no. Within our Unified Development Ordinance, most recent update, we no longer permit billboards. So a sign of that size and height would not be allowed within our code.
And how many feet is it from the village?
The closest point of the sign would be 10 feet from the village boundary.
So what control do we really have? Just feedback to offer them?
Certainly, we're not the permitting authority in this case, so it's a public hearing before their zoning board, similar to how our process would work here. If the board wanted us to provide some feedback or something in writing of our concerns or objection, if there are concerns from that standpoint, we can provide that as part of testimony for the review of the case. But ultimately, it's a decision that their board is responsible for making.
So my objection is it's 10 feet from our property line and it doesn't meet our UDO either.
Well, there's things that we'd talk with the village attorney if the board was interested in sending a letter, for example, objecting to this, that we could lay out a few items. Yeah, it's close to our borders. I'm concerned about not only the height, but also the size of the advertising area is significant. If you recall what was there before, I mean, it's been removed, but there was a sign. I don't know if you have any images of.
You can kind of see behind my image.
Yeah, I mean, it's small. This is a monstrosity compared to what was out there before.
Well, just a little bit of history for those that may not have been on the board at the time that we, back in the day, there was, I don't know if we call it an ordinance or resolution to abolish all of the signs within the community. And there was a sunset clause. They all had to come down by X date. When that date was approaching, the current sign company, Liberty Advertising, approached us and asked if there was a way that they could work with us on retaining some of these faces. They call them, each board is a face, so that they wanted the 4 faces. They wanted more, but we, through the negotiation and thing with, working with the village board and staff, that we decided that allowing 4 faces, 2 on like Julian property and 2 on the UP property, which is up by the railroad tracks, that they had to be dressed up to make them look more like a monument sign, to conform with what we would make our regular businesses, how we want their signs to look, so that they're close to the ground, they look like they're brick, whatever. Those didn't really turn out as great as we thought, but they're better than they were before. This is really, it is so far off of what our intent was for the village. I mean, this is the front door to our village coming from the northwest area. It's enormous. This is something that you would see on Route 53 or the tollway, and it's going to be big and bright. And it's, yeah, I've come to the realization that when we approved these signs that are here existing, it's more, they're geared more towards local advertisement. We have an agreement with them about the types of businesses that we'd like to see, and they have that obligation as well. They're very good, in my opinion, they're a good corporate, we have a good corporate relationship with them. They do what they can to help us. They help promote the things going on. This is just unbelievable. And the mere fact that this was, we just got this Thursday, and it's been in the works since August, is concerning to me. I just don't think this is what we want at our front door. I mean, we are spending a substantial amount of money trying to make our community look a lot better. We, through the grace and generosity of donors, our front entryway signs are going to come down, and that's going to look good. And this would fall within that boundary. And it's going to come down to us, because people are going to think it's us approving this. And this, to Trustee Walrus' comment, it does not fit within our current UDO. It's 10 feet from our corporate boundaries, 10 feet. So I think we have an obligation to our residents and our businesses to say, look, this does not conform with what we have already approved as a village board and as a village. So I would make the recommendation that we do what we can to, voice our opinion in ways that our voice will be heard.
So I'd just like to expand on your comments a little, because I totally agree with you. I don't feel any differently if the sign was on the far west side of this property. It's still an eyesore. So to the extent that we do create some sort of document to take to the county and express our disinterest with having this built, I think it needs to be broader, that it's not just because it's 10 feet away from our boundary. If it was 400 feet away on his west side, it would still be just as ugly. So I just think that a sign of that size, and if I remember correctly, I think it's electric too, it doesn't fit the character of Northwest Highway in that corridor, period, end of sentence.
And not to mention that it's, we have a new townhouse development that's right there. I mean, the driveway to get into that townhouse development is right there.
Yeah.
And they're building out that area now. Those lots now are being sold. So, I mean, if you think about it, if you bought a townhouse in there, you're looking out your front door, you're going to see this big electronic billboard 35 feet in the air.
Mayor, I might suggest that you incorporate perhaps the property owner on the south side of 14 for the property that's for sale there by Aldi, because that would impact their ability to develop their property as well. So, I guess in my opinion, maybe you get the townhouse folks and you make it sort of a petition, not just the village, but there's a lot of interested parties that would not want that there. And if we could add them all as part of this, maybe there's a strength in numbers there.
How big is that piece of property, Brian? Law's property there? That's all
I'd be
unincorporated?
guessing, I think it's probably 15, 20 acres, I'm guessing.
There's no way to incorporate him?
Yeah, that might be over.
And he's spent an enormous amount of money making those buildings look better than they have ever looked.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have to give him credit for really improving the way, and it's, it actually looks so much nicer than it ever has. And I appreciate that.
Yep.
So,
And I think I'll mention the trustee Dudek's comments. We have, as a municipality, we have the ability to plan or comment within 1.5 miles of our boundary. From a good planning perspective, our comprehensive plan looks at areas that are within 1.5 miles of our boundary. I think we can certainly, rather it's just be 10 feet from the property, incorporate elsewhere on, if it moves further down 14, it still would be within that jurisdictional planning area that we can still justify that we would have concerns with it anywhere in that frontage, not just right in that corner.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with the consensus where with everyone is with this. It's just, it just does not conform with anything around it for where it should be. And as Trustee Walworth was saying, I think mentioning the UDO is extremely important, incorporating what everyone else has mentioned as well. I would rely on our attorney to kind of help us with verbiage that might be additionally successful in strenuously showing our dismay for this and that we really don't want to see something like that. But I'll leave the wordsmithing to him.
Thank you. Is there any other comments on this?
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
There's also a big billboard.
Can you know the drill.
Dave Miller, Lake Julian Contracting, 65 Highway 14. He also has a big billboard just west of that on that same property. Another driveway there is about the same size. It's not lit up and everything else. It doesn't seem as intrusive. It seems silly to have two signs right next to each other. So maybe that could be part of your argument too. They already have a billboard on that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I will entertain, well, we have an executive session earmarked on here, which we do not need. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.
I'm going to stay later.